So now we're going to practice and role play what we have just been learning about in terms of taking turns and making contributions. So I have a couple of different prompts, and we're going to see kind of how the practical side of all of this plays out. So your mom or your dad asks you, either they pick you up from school, or if you get home and they're driving, or they pop your head into your room and they say, "Hey, how was school or practice today?" What's the typical response? Good. Fine. I don't know. Is that a conversation? The answer is no. It requires a response or a contribution, not simply a silence or a one-word answer. A one-word answer is a non-contribution. What that does is it prevents conversation from happening. And when you don't engage in a conversation, you don't have a conversation. Then it's just a one-sided talking to a wall, essentially, and that's the parent situation. And so this is a question that prompts, oh, hey, it's your turn and you need to contribute something. If you drop the ball on that, then you drop the ball on the conversation as a whole. So what is an appropriate response to how was school or practice today? If you don't feel like talking, you could simply say, I think it was good. I'm really tired right now and I'm trying to focus on my homework. Could we talk about this later? Then it puts it back on them. Sure. Have a good night. Or, yeah, I'll make you dinner or something like that. Or you could, another way to contribute would be like, it was good. How was your day? And genuinely engage. So think about simple situations like this where we violate the rules of like common courtesy and social psychological discourse. The second question, have you cleaned your room? And when do you plan to? Or something of that nature. No. Is no an answer? Is no an appropriate response? In a technical term, yes. This is where the question is flawed, because if they really want to know kind of more details about it, then the questioner is in error here for just saying, have you cleaned your room? Hey, I noticed your room was a mess. Have you cleaned it to my satisfaction or my standards? Or being more specific, have you put away blah, 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 blah? Are you going to vacuum it? That sort of thing. So this is where you could go back and they say, have you cleaned your room? And you say, no. Then you could say, well, what do you mean? Like, what specifically are you intending? Like, what's, etc. So go ahead and ask for clarifying questions. But again, this type of a conversation requires turns and contributions, not just one-word answers. Next, I'm going to Justin's house. See you. And you walk out the door. What is this? This is a statement. And then it's a flaw because the social interaction here is an exchange of, needs to be an exchange of time and place and permission, essentially, and respect. And you don't exchange any of those things when you make a simple statement. This is, again, the wrong genre. This shouldn't be a statement. It should be either a question, like, hey, can I go to Justin's house? Like, what are your plans for the night? Or if it is okay, like you and your family have decided in the economy of your conversation, you can make statements like this, you still need to take turns to have a conversation like, I'm going to Justin's house. And then you wait and you say, like, for them to have a contribution to say, like, okay, well, see you later. Okay, bye. You don't just kind of like fling a comment out there and then run away. The next one says, did I miss anything important while I was gone? Well, if you're asking this to a teacher, what are the implications in your question? Did I miss anything important while I was gone? Assuming that when you were gone, the things that you missed might not be important is slightly insulting. So if you think about the implication of that, you might want to rework your comment so that your contribution is more respectful or kind. So think about the things that you're saying before you say them, and how it's going to impact the other person. Next, what observations did you make about the text? The teacher might ask that, or something else. If you remain silent, then it's not a conversation. It's what? It's dogmatic, a teacher that is just pumping information into you, and it doesn't create sort of a give and take, push and pull learning environment. Instead, it's just dictatorial, and that's not what the classroom ought to be. Next, a girl might come up to you and say, "Hi, what do you do?" You just like nod your head or pull your head up and be like, "Hey," and then move on? Or do you actually take the opportunity, now it's your turn, to contribute something? So these are just some examples that I see on a daily basis in the average school day where students violate the expectations for typical conversational English, and they do not practice turns and contributions. So I wanted to kind of put that out there and give you a little bit of practice just to kind of think and heads up like, oh wow, we don't do very well with this. And I'm going to spend the next part of this video showing you a couple of other resources that you'll be looking at. One is called The Incredible Thing We Do During Conversations When We Take Turns Speaking. And so this is an article about different cultural conversation models. It even has like a video at the end from The Atlantic that you can look at, that talks about how this is done in different cultural contexts. Additionally, you're going to be looking at one chapter from Carnegie's book that we have kind of been reading this year called Making Conversation Effective. And this is going to be chapter 31. And it begins, conversation is the laboratory and workshop of the student. And so all learning depends upon conversation, which oftentimes is a broken mechanism in the classroom. So you can go ahead and read over this and kind of learn some things about what it looks like to be engaged in a conversation through the learning process. So those are two articles you'll be reading through this week and commenting on Flipgrid. And then the last thing I wanted to do is just kind of go over with you a couple of things that you'll be doing. So those are the articles you're reading for day 1. And then further, you're going to be practicing conversational speech by watching 2 interviews. These were done by the New York Times opinion section, and they're going to be giving brief biographies of, it's sort of like a biographical documentary on the individuals' lives. And what I want you to think about is, if you were to have a conversation with these individuals, what would you ask? What would you contribute? What would you want clarification on, and how would you add to this conversation? And then you'll upload your responses on Flipgrid. Secondly, I'm going to ask you to have a conversation with someone about the documentaries and practice the skills of conversation that we outlined in this past video. So how do you interact, communicate, analyze your content, and then post the results of that on Flipgrid? Like, what do you do well? And what areas do you struggle with as it regards just taking turns and contribution? And I think that is the primary flaw of conversation that we're going to find, is that many of us just stay silent when we really ought to contribute, and we don't volley back and forth effectively with the turns. So that is kind of my conclusion for the instruction part of week 1.